What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Saturdays in the SEC, episode 81. We got a pretty special episode tonight. This is actually our first ever audio and video podcast. This is going to be our first video on YouTube. So if you're seeing this, obviously, it'll be our first, video on our channel. So we're really excited. For those that have been following us, we've been on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Appreciate everybody listening to that, but hopefully you'll
Shout out
branch over.
Germany.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Germany, we got a little following going over there. So, but yeah, this is our first ever podcast with video. So, just like the
It's
video.
80 episodes to do it.
Yes, 80 episodes. That's our 81st. So, but be sure to like the video, subscribe. We got a lot of content you're not going to want to miss. Football season's right around the corner. And if you've been listening to us, we've been talking about our 2023 SEC preview series. It's that time of year. We've talked a lot about 2024 scheduling, recruiting, NIL, transfer portal. We went through all that, but now it's time to get down to talking about football and breaking down these
Absolutely.
teams in the SEC. So,
Absolutely.
Carden, how excited are you to be finally focusing on really the football details tonight?
This is some of my favorite things that we do on this podcast is the breakdowns of the two teams because it really, like you always say, it helps us more than anything, along with the listeners, gives them some insight, but it helps us learn everybody around the league before the game start. Refresh our memories on the things of the past. But you know this is why we're fans. This is what we care about. We just like diving into all the deep stuff and what makes up the teams and the recruiting battles and things along those lines and who's going to stand out this year. And, we got this young guy that's going to be starting on the offensive line. And can he do it? Or is he going to be a flop? He's replacing somebody that got drafted. And all. So it's just those are the types of conversations that make the beginning of the season so much fun because then you finally it unfolds right in front of you. But that the talking it up and the getting there, that's some of the best content that's out there, but that's some of my favorite conversations and some of the favorite things we do on this podcast.
Well, like I said, we've been discussing this preview series for a while where we figured this is the right time to launch it. We've got media days starting next week in Nashville. So excited about that. It's perfect time to do this here on July the 12th. So, and no better place to really start our preview series with the two defending champions of each division, the Georgia Bulldogs, the two-time defending champions, and then LSU, the surprise winner of the SEC West last year. But just diving into these teams on paper, and we're going to start with Georgia. Obviously, they're going for a three-peat. It'd be historic, but just want to get your opening thoughts on Georgia. On paper, they look as good as ever. And it's going to be interesting to see if they can pull off this three-peat. But what are your initial thoughts on Georgia's three-peat quest?
My initial thoughts are they have the most important thing that you need to make a long run to a championship, especially to go for a three-peat. And that's the offensive line and the defensive line. But they returned 4 of the 5 starters from the offensive line. So they have an absolute unit up there. That's what you need. They're going to be the team that's going to run the ball because they got Carson Beck, who's more like like when Jake Fromm played there. He's not going to have as much mobility as Stetson Bennett had, and it's also Mike Bobo's the offensive coordinator. He likes to throw the ball around, but they also got the running back room with Kendall Milton, Dajon Edwards, and Bronson Robinson, and so they all played last year. They're all experienced guys. They're all pretty much the starter. They're going to rotate in and out of there. So they also got Lad McConkey back. They got a couple receivers that started last year coming back. They got Ra Thomas. They got, Brock Bowers. They got Dominique Lovett. All these guys that are transferred in or that are assumed starters there. So Carson Beck's going to have the weapons around him, but the most important thing is he's going to have that offensive line to give him time at least early in the season to figure things out because they, like everybody talks about, they got a weak schedule, but you can only play, what you're scheduled. And we were right a couple of weeks ago. We were questioning why their schedule was so easy, but they were supposed to open up with Oklahoma this year. So you can't, if you open up with Oklahoma this year, that the schedule doesn't look as easy as it is, but they have an easy schedule set up, really an easy road ahead in front of them. No really tough challenges. So I think that they have the whole makeup. This is the Goliath of college football right now in every way, shape, or form, because their team is pretty much everybody coming back, and the pieces that they're replacing them with are older guys that have been in the system. So I don't think that they're going to skip too much of a beat. Might look a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made some great points. I mean, like you said, obviously with Stetson leaving now, new quarterback stepping in. I mean, like, what more could you ask for as a first time starting quarterback? You got Brock Bowers, one of the best players in the country, certainly the best tight end in the country. I mean, what a security blanket that is.
Yeah.
And you mentioned with the receiving core, Lab McConkey. I mean, look how he stepped up the last year or two. He's returning. You mentioned, Ra Thomas, Dominique Lovett. I mean, the two best receivers off two other SEC teams are joining this receiver group. Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint has been a big deep threat for them. I think he's going to have an expanded role. Arian Smith, he's had his moments. So yeah, they're deep at receiver. You mentioned the running backs. I mean, I think they're good there. I mean, maybe not necessarily the studs they maybe have had of the past, but they've got a good group there. But really, like you said, the offensive line really they didn't get enough credit for how
Absolutely
important they've
not.
been the last 2 years. I mean, they were so balanced, so efficient. They had the number one red zone offense in the country last year. And it's really all because of that offensive line. I mean, they allowed them to be so balanced. They could run it when they wanted to. They could play action when they wanted to. They could RPO when they wanted to. And their offensive line, paved the way for that. So, um, like you mentioned, they got 4 out of the 5 starters. Yeah, I mean, they're going to be solid again. They returned Cedric Van Pran, Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss at the guard spots, and then Armarius Mims and Ernest Green's expected to take over left tackle for Broderick Jones, who went to the NFL. But these are all highly rated guys, experienced guys. So, like you said, up
Amarius
front,
Mims he's no rookie either. Amarius Mims, he's replacing Warren McClendon, but he's not. It's not going to be that big of a step down.
no, and like you said, I don't expect their offense to miss much of a beat. I mean, obviously the quarterback battle's not totally settled yet, but Carson Beck's positioned himself well in the spring. I thought he looked really sharp in the spring game,
Oh
just
yeah,
of what we've seen of him this spring. So,
tossing it
um,
around.
yeah, I'm not expecting really much of a drop off. I think they're going to be one of the elite offenses again this year. But I am curious to see what kind of changes are. Like you said, I expect the efficiency to be there, the talent's there, but like you said, it may just look a little bit different. Obviously it's Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator now. So I don't expect it to be too different, but overall they've got the pieces there to be successful, and I think they're going to be a top 5, top 10 offense again.
100%. And then you go to the defensive side of the ball, and they return. I believe it's 6 starters on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you got Kamari Lassiter, Tyke Smith, Javon Bullard, Smale Munden Jr., Zion Logue. I mean, Nazir Stackhouse. So, I mean, you got all these guys coming back. Jamon Dumas Johnson, Jalen Walker. I mean, the defense has been the bread and butter for Georgia since Kirby's been there, and it's going to continue to stay that way. But I mean, this team on paper, like you said, is the team in college football. And then you look at their schedule, and it's like if they don't go 12-0, they messed up big time. Now, I think the worst case scenario they should go is 11-1, but they don't go 12-0. The Athens is going to burn to the ground. That's what this is expected. So that always makes it fun because something's bound to go bad. But I think that they're going to go at least be in the college playoff, and I think they're going to make another trip to the national championship and have a chance to defend their three-peat. But I'm not sure that it's going to be as easy as everybody's saying it is because of I mean, you got UT Martin, Ball State, South Carolina, UAB, Auburn, Kentucky, Vandy, Florida, Missouri. Your first real test, honestly, is November 11th. I mean, maybe you can make a case for Kentucky. I don't think they got it in them. Maybe Florida. I'm not that high on Florida this year. I don't know. I think that they're at least should be undefeated until they play Ole Miss.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think I actually wrote down here doing the research. I was like, my prediction is 12-0. I mean, I would be surprised if they're not in the playoffs. I mean, it would be a big upset if they're not in the
Yeah.
playoffs. Even if they lose a game, they're more than likely going to be in Atlanta. So yeah, I mean, they're the odds-on favorites certainly to get back to the playoff and be right there in Atlanta come first week in December. But like you said, I think their three toughest games, honestly. I think it's at Auburn. I think it's Ole Miss and Tennessee, like you mentioned. I mean, um, I'm curious. Obviously, we don't know what Auburn's going to be yet. You never know. Like, hey, if Auburn comes in better than expected, that's early in the season. Auburn's got a favorable schedule to start, so vibes could be really high by then. I mean, Auburn's probably going to be at least at worst probably 3-1 coming into that game, maybe. I can't remember exactly their first four, but so I think obviously that's a tough environment to go in, especially if, things click early for Auburn. That could be a tricky one, in September. But like you said, really it comes down to I don't know if Ole Miss can beat them in Athens, but I think they give them a better game than some of the other teams on their schedule.
Here's my thing. I I think Auburn doesn't have the guys to. I mean, they might compete early just because the crowd's going to be in it early season. They're healthy. They just don't got the guys. They're not. They're going to pull away in the second half like they have the last 3-4 years. But what I wrote down on my paper, I said if I think Georgia's going undefeated. But if Georgia was to lose a game in the regular season, I think it's going to be to Ole Miss. I know it's at home, but it's Lane Kiffin. He's been there at Ole Miss. He's got things going the way he wants to. He's got his recruits in there now. They're older. He's got Quinshawn Judkins. Enough said there. But this game is the week before they go to Neyland. It's the week before they play Tennessee. Ole Miss is probably not going to be undefeated at this moment. They're probably going to have 3, maybe 4 losses, maybe 2 losses, but I think they're going to have about 3 losses at this point. Ole Miss will. I think that Georgia potentially could be looking ahead at the Tennessee game and get smacked around by Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin's high flying offense. I really think that if anybody could beat Georgia, that it's going to be Ole Miss this year, but I don't see it happening. I think Georgia's going undefeated. But hear me now. If they are to lose a game, it will be to Ole Miss. So watch the betting lines on November 11th. That's all I'm saying.
I like it. I mean, and I was actually looking at some stats today. Crazy stat for Georgia. You look back at all their losses and even their close games. Every time, like last year, the game against Missouri, when they, obviously kind of a clunker of a performance, barely pulled it out. They were -2 in the turnover margin. Since the 2018 SEC championship game, since Jalen Hurts came off the bench and led Alabama past Georgia in that game, Georgia is 36-0 when they're even or ahead in the turnover margin.
Oh my God.
36-0 when they're even or ahead in the turnover margin. Every time they've had a bad performance or lost a game here in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been most of the time because they were -2 or worse in the turnover margin.
Were they minus in the turnover margin against Missouri last year?
They were -2, yeah.
I believe it
That's
because
the
they almost
reason.
lost it.
Exactly. I mean,
What about the Ohio State game?
I don't recall. I mean, obviously they end up
They were
pulling it
their
out.
only other close one I can recall.
Yeah, but like looking back to 2019, 2020,
Oh, okay.
some of those seasons, like the games they did lose, it was because of turnovers. Like they were -2 usually or worse in the turnover margin. So like the 2020 game in Tuscaloosa, Stetson threw a couple picks. Like it's usually a lot of times it's them beating themselves or making mistakes. That's either keeping the team in the game or, obviously the other team, pulling off an upset or beating them. But pretty much anytime they're even or plus in the turnover margin, it's usually, a pretty heavy Georgia victory. So, and that's the way for a lot of teams. Obviously,
Right.
turnovers are so critical. But usually it's Georgia, like in the Missouri game, maybe some self-inflicted wounds, and you got to give the other team credit as well because everybody has Georgia circled. Like, this is the 2-time defending champs. Like, this is the biggest game on everybody's schedule. So, so obviously they know they're going to get everybody's best shot. But like you said, I mean, I do like your Ole Miss point, though. I mean, looking at the schedule with that Tennessee game, that's the game in the East that everybody's going to be
Oh yeah,
talking about all year. So, I could see them sleepwalking into that game. Obviously, Lane, we know, can put up points. So that'll be interesting to see for sure. I'm curious to see where Ole Miss is at that point in the year. And same with Tennessee. Like, we talk about this Georgia Tennessee game now. Who knows? It may not end up being as big as we think because,
you're right.
like I said, I mean, Tennessee, it's possible they could take a step back. We just don't know yet. So that's the beauty of it, though. There's some games that are going to be way bigger than we think, and there's some really big games we think that may not end up being as big. So, but like I said, that's the beauty of the SEC, though. So you got to bring it every
Absolutely.
week. Even though the schedule looks very favorable, and it is compared to most, but there's several of these teams that could beat them if they're playing their C game or D game and are turning the ball over, and giving the other team opportunities. Then some of these could be a little bit closer. But like you said, I think 12-0 is probably most likely, but 11-1's probably absolute worst case. I mean, it's kind of scary to think too that last year was more of a rebuilding year for Georgia's defense than this year is, and
Yeah,
that's kind of like you think about that, you're like, man, that's kind of scary. I mean, the MVP of both playoff games is returning. He was the star in Georgia's defense last year. He's moving to safety,
hmm
more than likely. So you mentioned Tyke Smith, Malachi Starks, Kamari Lassiter. I mean, there's just so much talent. I mean, Michael Williams, probably one of the best defensive linemen for Georgia. He's coming off a minor, knee injury, so he didn't really play much in the spring or anything. So, yeah, they're loaded. I would say the one question mark, just as far as not really from talent, but from a youth standpoint, so they're outside linebackers. They're kind of green in that area. Some guys with not a ton of experience, but outside of that they're pretty experienced in most other areas. And
yeah.
obviously
Their
we know what
front
kind
is
of talent
nice.
they have.
Yeah, they Christian Miller. He's expected to get more playing time this year. He's been just pretty much a reserve defensive tackle, and then obviously, like I said earlier, Warren Brinson's going to be the expected starter at defensive tackle. So their up front is going to be nice. They're going to be sturdy. So nothing to worry about there. I don't think that we're going to see them skip too much of a beat because they're kind of like Bama is, and it's not a rebuild. It's just a reload. You get your next guys in there. It's not a oh no, we're going to have to take 2 years before we're good again. It's just everybody gets in there. It's the process of the whole of the whole culture there of the whole program, and every guy it's next man up, and if you can't do it, the guy right behind you is going to do it. So it's no, there's no more rebuilding there for Georgia as long as Kirby's there. So I don't think that anybody's going to have to worry about anything. The only thing that's going to start stifling them is just a schedule that they're going to have to start playing in the next few years as things are changing. So I think this year with the way things are going, I think their bye is kind of in a weird place. Not saying that buys are supposed to be certain places, but I think they could have got a better bye week. I think it'd have been nice to have it after the Florida game because then you got your last 4 weeks and you're rested up for them. But they kind of got it after the Vandy game, so I don't know before the Florida. They're probably going to like that, but I just think it's a little early in the season, and as deep as they're going to go, you want one later in the season, so you kind of your bye weeks are kind of stacking up on each other, or at least they feel like they are.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see where Florida is at that point. Obviously, I mean, we don't really know what they're going to have. I mean, I'm kind of like you. I mean, not a lot of people are high on him this year. I just think it's a little early because he hasn't really got his full, recruiting classes in there
Right.
yet. Like in 2024, 2025, I think they're going to be much better positioned. And 2024, they've already made great strides and kind of closing that gap with Georgia. But I think it's a year or two too early for Florida there. So I don't think the bye week's going to do. I think Florida's bye week's probably at the same time as well before
Yeah.
that game. So, but we'll see where Florida's at that point. But But overall, like you said, I mean, the back half, I think it would be better if it was a week later, probably, like Halloween weekend, like you said, because two of their three toughest games are, in November. So that's when the grind, you're a little bit more beat up and stuff. I think the
Yeah.
point with Georgia too is they won the title in 21, and they've proven to everybody they can win it. They can reload and turn around and be ready and make another run and win it all again. Like
Yeah.
they've proven, like, hey, we can win at a high level and we can reload and be right back in the
And
conversation
make it
next
look
year.
even easier than it was the year before.
Yeah, I mean they went 15-0, like you said. I
And
mean the
they really
only
only have, other than the Missouri game, they really only have one tough game, and it was in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, with the Ohio State, it was a classic. I mean, we knew that was going to be a tough matchup for them. But it takes somebody like that to potentially knock off Georgia.
Yeah.
You got to have a good quarterback on the other side, and you got to have some weapons. If you don't have that, unless they really beat themselves, you don't have a chance at them. Honestly, I mean that's the reason I give Tennessee or a team like maybe Ole Miss a chance is because they do probably have the quarterback. Tennessee definitely had it last year. I think Joe Milton will have a good year. But you got to have the quarterback and the weapons to be able to put some stress on that defense. Because if you don't, like Ohio State, they had C.J. Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr., Abuka, all those weapons. Like it takes that to beat a team like Georgia.
100%. And then I don't think anybody on their schedule has anybody like that except for who you're talking about, Ole Miss, Tennessee. And I don't even know necessarily that Ole Miss has those guys. I just think it might be the way Lane schemes around things because he's played him or seen him. There's a lot of film on him now, so he knows what to expect. And so I think that that's a great chance. I just don't see Tennessee. We saw what happened to them last year. They ain't that much better up front than they were last year. So I'm not expecting that to be much different this year against Tennessee.
I wish I could flip it and this game was in Oxford. I would love to see that game in Oxford,
Oh
but
yeah,
obviously it's in Athens. But if that was in Oxford, I would feel even better about it. But like you said, though, that's a perfect spot for Ole Miss. So, like, if Ole Miss could pick a week for it to be, you would want it before Tennessee because that's the game everybody's going to be talking about. And like you said,
yeah,
this one could get overlooked a little bit.
yeah. If
Um,
Ole Miss was week 6 or 7, I would say easy win. But being there, that's just it's a tricky place in the schedule. It's where Ole Miss wants to be, like you said.
yeah, and obviously Georgia hasn't had any problem with this, but I mean, the one thing you worry about, you've won two in a row. I mean, people are human. Complacency can set in, and
Yeah,
especially if they run through the first half of that schedule like everybody expects they will, you know, you never know. Guys could come in a little overconfident or, maybe a little complacent. I don't expect that to happen, but, they are humans at the end of the day. So you never know. It's certainly a possibility, but it's going to take Georgia beating themselves a little bit. And that
right.
happens throughout the course of a season. Like you're going to have days where you're just not on your A game. We saw that no matter how good you are. I mean, Georgia went 15-0 last year and looked very beatable at Missouri, but that tends to happen over a, 14, 15 game schedule like Georgia's going to play. But they were able to pull that off. So I'm sure there'll be a game in there or two that we don't expect it to be that way, um, but are they going to have the ability to pull them off? And most of the time they do. So, but yeah, that the Ole Miss week does set up, and you made a great point with that. That is a favorable setup for them as far as that goes. But outside of the rest of it, I don't think anybody's there yet on that level unless Georgia just really helps them out.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't see that happening.
Well, it's kind of moving over to the other side a little bit here in the West. Obviously, this is our last year of talking divisions, so
Mm-hmm.
these divisions will be out the window next year.
Going to
So
sound weird talking about them all and not be no East and West.
it is, yeah, it's definitely going to be different. And we've talked about it for those who haven't, heard us before now, but we talked a lot about the 2024. scheduling. So if you want our thoughts on that, you can go back on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and listen to that. Definitely going to be different. It's going to
Whoever
make it.
wins this year's championship is going to be the forever East and West champion, forever and ever and ever and ever. There will
That's a
never
good.
be another
That's a good point. So it's extra even bragging rights to.
reigning champion.
Yeah, like you said, 100 years from now, we'll be like, hey, we're still SEC East champions or SEC West
Absolutely.
champions. So that's even more incentive to win it this year. So, but moving on to LSU a little bit, obviously, huge first year for Brian Kelly. Surprise. I mean, we were talking about this team after the Florida State game last year, and like, man, this team's an absolute mess. I mean,
Yeah.
they looked terrible, and boy, did the narrative
Players
change in a
fighting their
hurry.
coaches. Yeah.
I mean, it was what a turnaround. I mean, after that first game, I was like, I don't know if this LSU team will go to a bowl game. And then they end up winning 10 games and winning the SEC West. I mean, it's just kind of a tribute to how well Brian Kelly did in his first year, the culture he's kind of setting there. Obviously, what he's doing on the recruiting trail so far, and we always know LSU has talent. Um, but this is a guy that's going to raise that even more, and he's a proven winner. He's won every stop he's been at. So I think things are trending up big time in Baton Rouge. I think things are only going to get better, and this is going to be a preseason top 10 team this year. Um, so they're definitely way ahead of schedule. But just kind of give me your early thoughts on LSU and kind of what you're expecting this year.
Well, second verse, same as the first. When I was looking through my, teams, I'm looking at the offensive line for Georgia, and I'm like, damn, this might be the best offensive line in the SEC. And then I look at the offensive line for LSU, and they're returning 4 of the 5. Georgia's returning 3 of the 5, but LSU's returning 4 of the 5 starters, and I'm like, damn, this might be the best offensive line in college football, not just the SEC. So I think that obviously that is the place to start. If you can't move the ball, you're not going to have zero chance to win. So they got Emory Jones Jr. returning, Charles Turner, Miles Frazier, Will Campbell all returning. They got Mason Taylor at tight end, Malik Neighbors returning on out wide, Brian Thomas Jr., Kyron Lacey. I mean, their running back room is not exactly what LSU's used to be, like a Darius Geis or a Leonard Fournette or somebody like that. There's not just a one powerhouse, but they do got Josh Williams, Noah Kane, returning or coming back, and then Jaden Daniels, and then obviously Garrett Nussmeier. We all know I'm huge on Garrett Nussmeier, but got Jaden Daniels going to be. People are talking about him going to be the Heisman, and I think he has all the ability to do that. But will he do it? We're yet to see. But he's got all the weapons around him, like I just named all the 4 offensive linemen, and then Garrett Dellinger is coming in to replace at right guard. So I mean, he's no slouch. But you got Kyron Lacey, Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors all out wide, and then you got those 4 or that offensive line blocking for you. I don't know how you can't be successful if you're a half decent quarterback, and we all know he's more than a half decent quarterback. So I expect LSU to be much to be the same as last year. Winning the SEC West or competing to win for it, but in a more polished fashion. They're going to be much better, and it's not going to be a whirlwind of emotions throughout the season and people not expecting it and it taking them by surprise. It's going to be the expectation. And I think the team's going to prepare like that. So it's going to seem and look like a completely different team in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, looking at their offense on paper, I mean, they're loaded. I mean, this is the best quarterback room in the SEC by far, one of
Hands
the
down.
best in the country. I mean, I don't think anybody has a better duo than Daniels and Nussmeier, especially in the SEC. I think they're one of the better QB rooms in the country. So regardless of what direction they go, and like I said, they're going to have to give Nussmeier enough snaps to keep him happy because they
Yeah.
want him at worst case starting in 2024 because he's the real deal. Big time arm. We saw him flash his ability in the
And
SEC
we
championship.
heard what I said a few episodes ago. I'm calling it about week 5, week 6. He's going to be the starter. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I mean, he's the real deal for sure. The only thing I'm not sure about, I just think Jaden Daniels is going to have a great year too. So it's just hard to like. I could see it either way. I could
And
see
I can't
Daniels
argue that.
going. Yeah, I could see Daniels going the whole because I just think the weapons are there, the offense is there. The one question I'm curious to see from a standpoint offensively this year is, are they going to run Jaden Daniels as much as they did last year? Obviously, he's not the biggest guy. I think they would probably prefer not to have to run him as much as they did last year. Jaden Daniels had 186 carries last year. He was the leading
Yeah.
rusher on the team for 885 yards and 11 touchdowns. Nobody else had more than 100 carries. Everybody else was less than 100 carries. Um, so obviously, I they would prefer probably not to have to run him that much. So I would expect them to lean more on the running backs this year. They've got a pretty solid group. Josh Williams and Noah Kane, they average a little over 5 yards a carry last year, but they added Logan Diggs from Notre Dame, 822 yards last year for Notre Dame. So I expect him to have a big role as well, and for them to lean on those backs a little bit more because like I said, I don't think they want Jaden Daniels carrying it 186 times,
No chance.
next year. And obviously, sacks account in that as well. So that necessarily isn't all carries. Um, and that's one area they did struggle with last year. They did have their offensive line definitely overachieved, but they were pretty young, so they got a lot of room to grow. But like you said, I think they're going to take a big step forward this year. They were second worst in the SEC in sacks, so they gave up a lot of sacks even
Yeah.
with a mobile quarterback. So I know they're going to be a lot better, but I think they're going to lean on the run game a little bit more with the backs this year, not to have to use him quite as much, and maybe save him for some of the bigger games like
And he got a
against
deep
Florida.
stable, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really have any studs or any stars necessarily, but they're a pretty well-rounded group. Um, but I think they will pick and choose their spots to run Jaden Daniels a little bit more with some quarterback runs. Like obviously against Florida State, he'll probably run a little bit more in Tuscaloosa on November 4th. He'll probably
Yeah.
run a little bit more. So, but that's really the big question for me offensively for them is, do they kind of tweak that game plan a little bit this year, maybe not run him quite as much, because I was kind of surprised to see that big of a discrepancy in carries. Your quarterback's got 80 something more carries than your top leading rusher at running
Yeah.
back. That's pretty rare. So but I would expect them to lean a little bit more. But you mentioned young offensive line, they're going to be improved this year. Will Campbell's a stud at left tackle. He's on everybody's draft boards next year. He's just a sophomore this year. He's a first round pick in the 2025 draft or whatever. He's going to be a stud, one of the up and coming tackles in football. At receiver, you mentioned Malik Neighbors is a stud, over 1,000 yards last year. Kyron Lacey's going to have a bigger role this year. Brian Thomas is a big, possession 6'4" receiver. I think he was second on the team in touchdowns last year. So, yeah, they're really well rounded offensively. I expect them to have another great year. They're great depth at quarterback, great at receiver, improving on the offensive line. So, yeah, this is going to be one of the elite offenses in the country for sure.
And on the defensive side of the ball, we got Harold Perkins coming back, Greg Brooks, Major Burns, both the safeties are coming back. But they got a bunch of guys transferring in on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to try and say this guy's name is a linebacker transferring in from Texas, Ovi Ogufo. I'm not sure how to say Oghoufo. I'm not sure how to say his last name. Played 2 years at Texas, and Omar Spates is transferring in from Oregon State. He's a linebacker as well. And they got some cornerbacks. Zy Alexander from SLUE's transferring in, and Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse is transferring in. So they've got a lot of guys transferring in on the defensive side of the ball that have played a lot of meaningful snaps at the college level. So that's obviously going to help with the experience on that side of the football. So they went out and got the things they needed to compete this year because their offense is going to be so good. They're going to have somebody to combat that and keep them in games if it gets to a shootout. Like with Alabama, it's going to probably get into a shootout at some point in that game. Texas A&M at the end of the game, at the end of the season, last year got them. And then, Florida State, are you going to be able to duke it out with them early? So they had to go get some pieces on the defensive side of the ball. And I like the pieces that they went and got, especially in the secondary. They needed some help back there. They were kind of weak back there. So they went and kind of attacked those positions. And I'm excited to see what they got, because we got Mekhi Wingo and Jacoby Guillory coming back. So I'm excited to see what they got, because this is shaping up to be. I mean, these are the two teams that won the championships last year of their division. So I'm not surprised that we're pretty much saying the same things about both of these teams. But I mean, these are kind of mirror images of each other. I feel like right now they're two of the top dogs in the country, and especially in their conference. So they're the ones that everybody's chasing after last year.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, Georgia's going to be the preseason #1 team. I mean, LSU's probably going to be in that anywhere from 6 to 8 range,
Yeah.
probably. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they're definitely a top 10 team. So, obviously, both teams are playoff expectations, championship expectations for sure. Defensively, man, getting Mason Smith back for LSU is just ginormous. He tore his
Yeah.
ACL in the Florida State game last year, so he missed the whole year. I think obviously when they suit up against FSU this year, he'll be a full calendar year removed from that ACL tear. So he should be pretty much good to go. I mean, he's a franchise type of defensive tackle. So they definitely missed him a lot last year. Their run defense wasn't great at times for sure. But you mentioned Mekhi Wingo. They add Jordan Jefferson, transfer from West Virginia. A couple of the big question marks, or I won't even say weaknesses, but how do they replace those edge rushers, BJ Ojolari and Ollie Gay? Like you mentioned, they really attacked the portal. A Jofo from Texas, hopefully I'm pronounced that correctly. Braden Swinson, Paris Shan from Arizona, Savion Jones, they expect to step up. So they attacked the portal in that area. And the same with the secondary. They got Denver Harris from Texas A&M, who played early on there, got into some trouble a little bit, but he was basically the top corner in his class. He was part of that historic, recruiting class for Texas A&M in 2021. So they expect big things out of him. And then you mentioned Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse. They feel pretty good about the safeties. I think Greg Brooks and Major Burns are returning there. But I would say edge rusher and corner are the two question marks, but those were the areas they really attacked in the portal. And they got one of the best defensive players, if not the best, in Harold Perkins. They worked him inside linebacker in the spring, I think, to get him some reps there, but he can play inside. He can play outside. The dude can just flat out play anywhere you put him.
Edge rusher, nose tackle, safety. It don't matter.
I mean, like you mentioned, they brought in Omar Spates from Oregon State, like a plug and play inside linebacker who had, I believe, over 300 career tackles. So this guy's a machine. He's going to clean up a lot on that defense and allow Perkins to kind of roam to different areas and attack off the edges. So I think that's going to free him up. Greg Penn.
By the way, Major Burns, all football name team.
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
College name team. Major Burns, what a great name.
Yeah, absolutely. But Greg Penn, the second leading tackler, he's back. So they're loaded at linebacker. Like I said, Mason Smith, I think, is going to open up some lanes for those linebackers. But yeah, I'm expecting Harold Perkins a huge year, no matter where they put him. Like I said, I think they're going to move him around a little bit and attack different matchups. And I think having that experience and that veteran leadership at middle linebacker is going to free him up even more. So yeah, like I said, edge rusher a little bit, which obviously Harold Perkins is going to help with a little bit because he'll attack off the edge, but kind of getting some production there because they lost two really good players. Yeah. And then specifically at cornerback, they really need Denver Harris, as I mentioned, to step up. They're expecting a lot out of him. They got J.K. Johnson from Ohio State, a transfer. And then you mentioned Zy Alexander, they're expecting really good things out of too. So overall, not many weaknesses at all, if you can even call them that. Just maybe a few question marks here or there, just like every team has. But this is for sure a top 10 team. They're going to be right there in the playoff conversation, in my opinion.
All right. And so looking at their schedule, I think they're going to redeem themselves. I think they're going to beat Florida State, Grambling State, no chance. Mississippi State, or they stand no chance against LSU. But Mississippi State, I don't think they got a prayer in the world. Arkansas could shape up. I'm still indifferent on Arkansas. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I could look back and 2 weeks before the season and change my mind on this game. But as of right now, I'm going with LSU. I just think they got the team, they got the guys. They're on a mission this year. I expect LSU to be undefeated all the way down to Alabama. They catch a bye week after Army, which is the perfect time to have a bye week before you go to Alabama. I just don't think that they're going to get Bama back-to-back years. I really don't see it happening. Could shape out that way because the question marks around Alabama right now, the biggest ones, in my opinion, is the quarterback. Who's going to be the quarterback? Are they going to play multiple quarterbacks? If they do, when are they going to go to one? So if the quarterback's situation isn't perfect by that point, I mean, I know it's in November, but if they've plug and played 3 or 4 different quarterbacks in the 10 games to get there, the 8 games to get there, and they've played 3 different quarterbacks throughout the season, the odds are looking in LSU's favor. But I just don't think that that's going to happen. I think Alabama's just they're going to be fine. I don't know why everybody's freaking out. So I think Alabama beats LSU. And then I think LSU redeems himself, bounces back, and just knocks the crap out of Florida. Georgia State, no prayer. And I think A&M goes back-to-back and beats them in back-to-back years. This is the year A&M is supposed to do it. And I think they do it. They beat them in last year, correct?
They did. Yeah, they beat
That's
them
what I
by
thought. That's what I thought.
38-23, I
Yeah,
believe,
that's
because that
right.
was a
Because
big
I lost some money on
surprise.
that game. Yeah, I lost some money because LSU folded for me, so I lost some money. But I was pretty sure that was that. But I believe that Texas A&M is going to beat them back-to-back years. I think Texas A&M is going to be really good this year. I really do. So I think LSU goes 10-2 at the best, 11-1. But I think they go 10-2 and they don't repeat.
Yeah, I'm with you. I actually got 10-2 or 9-3. I'm like you. I'm leaning towards they're a slight favorite against Florida State. I think that's going to be a really close game. That's kind of a playoff type of game in week 1. That's the game I'm most excited about week 1, and I think most other people feel that way too. Um, I think they get revenge on Florida State. I think they win a close one there. But I think FSU is going to have a really good year too. But I think LSU gets revenge there. I'm like you. I think they probably lose to Alabama. Just being in Tuscaloosa, I think that's going to be a tough one to win 2 years in a row. And like you mentioned, the quarterback situation. I mean, if it's not settled by then something's wrong. So I'm hoping it's settled by week 10 or
I mean,
9
I
or
think
whatever.
it'll be. I was being
Yeah.
dramatic.
No, I agree. So, but I mean, you are right. If it's not going well, then that definitely plays in LSU's favor, no matter where it's played at. But like you, I think they probably not going to win that game 2 years in a row. But I think it's going to be a great game though. Um, I'm gonna go 10-2. I think they lose to Alabama. I think they beat Florida State, so they split their 2 big games. I just think they have a letdown somewhere in there, like that A&M game last year or like the Tennessee game last year.
Mhm.
I think between either Ole Miss, Texas A&M, or Arkansas, I think it's going to be one of those. I don't know which one it's going to be, but I think there's going to be a surprise clunker performance in there somewhere.
Wouldn't shock
I
me.
I think they're going to have a letdown in one of those, and all of those are good teams. So I mean, it wouldn't be like a huge shock or anything. But I do think they're going to have a week maybe where they don't have a great performance and maybe lose one they're favored, because really they're going to be favored in every game except in Tuscaloosa. I mean, they're a slight favorite against Florida State. I mean, there's nobody else they're not going to be favored against. So they're
Yeah,
going to be favored in 11 out of 12. So I do think between one of those teams where it's A&M or Arkansas or Ole Miss or even somebody else, but I do think they have a letdown in there. But I'm thinking 10-2, 9-3, maybe, because I mean, I could see 9-3 if maybe they drop the Florida State game. But anything less than 9 regular season wins would definitely be a big disappointment.
Oh yeah,
But I think 9-3 is about right. 10-2 is very possible as well. And that would put them really about where they're rated in the preseason. I think they're going to end up in that 6-8 range, probably just on the outside looking in. But obviously, if they win that Florida State game or avoid that clunker or even beat Alabama back to back, they're going to be right there. They definitely have all the pieces to do it for sure.
I agree. Uh, Going into next week, SEC Media Days, no longer at the Galleria in Hoover. It has been moved. I believe it's down at the beach. I could be wrong on that.
It's
I
in
believe it's down.
Nashville, actually.
Oh, okay. It's in Nashville. Was it
Yep.
at the beach? Was it at Destin last year?
That's where they had the meetings, the spring
That's right. That's
meetings.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. So
But yeah, I
in
know they've
Nashville.
changed it up recently with the locations.
So we got opening up LSU, Missouri, and Texas A&M. I mean, what better than to get the clown on day one, Jimbo Fisher, Mr. Oompa Loompa himself. Then we got
Yeah.
Auburn, Hugh Freeze, Georgia, Kirby Smart, Mississippi State, and Zach Arnett, Vandy, and Clark Lee on day two. Day three, we got Bama and the GOAT, Arkansas and Sam Pittman, Florida and Billy Napier, Kentucky, Mark Stoops. And then on the final day, we've got Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, South Carolina, Shane Beamer, and Tennessee, and Josh Heupel.
Yeah, really good schedule here. I'm the last day ought to be very exciting for
Yeah.
real. For Thursday, I'm excited to see Lane. Obviously Shane Beamer, he's a character as well. So Heupel obviously coming off a huge year. So no, I'm liking how it's setting up. I mean, uh pretty big day on Tuesday as well. Hugh Freeze, a lot of momentum going on there in Auburn. Obviously the two-time champ, Kirby Smart. And I'm interested to see from Zach Arnett too. Obviously, we've mentioned stepping into a really, really tough situation, replacing Mike Leach. So I'm hoping for a really good year for Zach Arnett and Mississippi State, and having Will Rogers in his back pocket's gonna
Yeah.
is a nice way to start year one as a head coach.
100%. I believe that Kirby's not going to be asked a whole lot of questions about football and a whole lot of questions about his program because of what's going on down there and all the allegations and all the arrests and warrants of being people, not warrants, but people being pulled over traffic violations, people speeding like crazy. So I'm sure he's ready for this to end already, and it hasn't even started because they came out yesterday and had a press conference and spoke about all that. So they had zero tolerance for any mistreatment or any thing that goes against Georgia's code of conduct, and any mistreatment of women or any illegal activities, whether it be racing or whatever it is not ever accepted by Georgia, and it's always frowned upon. And Kirby Smart said he had daughters and his wife, and he would never condone that. And he pretty much says that they're 18-year-old kids and they're going to mess up. And, at the end of the day, we can only tell them what to do. We can't make them do something. So he's struggling, it seems, to get some of the guys to act right. But I mean, I don't think it's as a culture problem, because I think these are just, people who think that they're entitled and that nothing is ever going to happen to them because of who they are and where they are. And so I think that people need to be made examples of in some way. Maybe he can't do it, but someone else can, and the police or someone in the school that's a higher up than, has control of who does and doesn't come to school or can play and, be eligible and things along those lines. I think some of them need to be facing consequences for real, to be so others will see that it's a real thing and something bad can happen from it, and that you're pretty much just throwing your future away being an idiot. So I think that he's going to be answering a lot of questions like that.
Yeah, I think you're right too. Obviously, this has kind of been brought to light here recently in the last, I'd say month or so, with some of the reporting out of the Atlanta area. They've actually reached out to the Atlanta Journal, I believe it is, asking them to retract one of their statements or one of their headlines.
Yes,
Kind
it
of
was fake or something. Yeah.
reporting on the situation. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a certainly become a trend there. I didn't realize it was as bad as it was until I, read some of the reporting. But it's been a lot of speeding. Obviously they had the tragic situation that Jalen Carter was involved in with the player and the staffer. So obviously that was a horrible situation. And then there's, like you mentioned, a lot of tickets, going 80 plus miles an hour. So it's definitely become a trend there. And like you said, I think he's going to be answering a lot of questions about that. I'm certain of it.
100%.
Um, so yeah, we'll see if those kind of things get corrected. Maybe that's a little bit of a wake up call, um, but yeah, according to the reports, it has become quite a theme over the last 4 or 5 years, really throughout Kirby's tenure. And obviously every program deals with different situations. You're dealing with young people, so things are going to happen. But um, I guess this has been happening at a rate that's, I guess, a little alarming compared to
Yeah.
what you would normally expect out of a program. So,
100%.
but yeah, I'm curious to see his answers on that and how much he's kind of pressed on that issue. Obviously, that's a tough, it's hard to answer for, so we'll see what he's got to say. But obviously I'm excited for that. That's really the kickoff for football season, if you will. Um, I always love the coverage they do for it. So we'll be, talking about that next week as well. But over the next 6 or 7 weeks, we're going to be doing these previews, breaking down 2 teams a week. Um, so stay tuned for our next two, coming next week. Um, but just be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel. As I mentioned earlier, we got a lot of great content coming. We're keeping you posted from now until the end of season, and then after that, we'll just start this whole cycle over again. So, just really excited to be talking football. And now we've talked a lot about 2024, and now we've fully turned our sights to 2023, and I couldn't be more excited for it.
Me or you either. I mean, I'm so excited. This is the best time of the year. And yes, give our YouTube video, like, subscribe, share, do whatever you got to do. But we're gonna be in your face now.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, thank everybody for tuning in. Our first ever audio and video podcast. Excited to be doing those, and appreciate everybody bearing with us. We're kind of learning. This is a learning experience for us, um, but it'll just keep getting better and better. And I think you're gonna like the coverage here. We're 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 SEC football 24/7, 365. So just be sure
Absolutely.
to lock in with us. We're
Once season starts, we'll be doing two episodes per week. Hopefully, like we did last year, as time allows with our jobs. But we did one as a review the Sunday or Monday after, and then on Wednesday or Thursday we do our preview for the next week, for the coming weekend. So those are also really fun. A lot of banter goes on in those, so I'm excited.
we got to have some bet picks lined up this year, man. I got to pad the
Absolutely,
account again this year, man.
100%.
I'm bringing it up this year. So
I'm riding then.
yeah, hey, I'm telling you, those lock of the weeks, man, they hit, man. When they hit that account, it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling. So we're gonna be right back at it again with some good bet picks. Hopefully, winning more money than we're losing. We're gonna be breaking it down regardless. So we're just at the beginning. So I'm pumped for it. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you here next week.
See you guys.